Javier was just a struggling mechanic, working long hours in a small-town garage to make ends meet. When a luxury car sputtered into his shop, its owner, a woman with an air of quiet authority, seemed oddly unbothered by the breakdown. She watched as Javier worked tirelessly, refusing to overcharge her despite his own hardships. He had no idea that the woman he was helping was a billionaire, and that his simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The night air was thick with the scent of oil and rust. A single flickering bulb buzzed above Javier's head, casting long shadows over the cluttered garage. The place was a mess. Tools scattered across the workbench, old tires piled up in the corner, the scent of grease clinging to everything. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Javier wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, his hands still stained with motor oil. Another long day, another impossible repair. The old sedan in front of him had seen better days, just like its owner, an elderly man from down the street who couldn't afford a new car, let alone an expensive repair. Javier had spent the last few hours patching it up, making do with second-hand parts he had salvaged from other vehicles. He wasn't going to charge the man full price. He never did. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Dinner could wait. His mother's medicine couldn't. Glancing at the clock, he sighed. Almost midnight. His shift had technically ended hours ago, but leaving wasn't an option. There was always one more job, one more bill to cover. He thought about his mother, lying in bed at home, her breathing shallow. The hospital had been clear. She needed proper treatment, but proper treatment cost money, more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Javier's fingers clenched around the wrench in his hand. He had tried everything, working double shifts, picking up extra jobs, fixing cars on the side. No matter how hard he worked, it was never enough. Every time he felt like he was getting ahead, something knocked him back down. A past-due bill, a rent increase, a broken-down car that a desperate customer couldn't afford to fix but needed for work. The garage door rattled as a cold wind blew through the open entrance. He should close up, get some sleep, but he knew the cycle would just start over again tomorrow. Work, worry, barely scrape by. His hands tightened into fists. He wasn't afraid of hard work. He had been fixing cars since he was 16, learning everything he could from his father before he passed away. But now, at 28, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him harder than ever. He was tired of fighting a battle he couldn't win. A cough echoed from outside. His little sister, Sophia, was standing at the entrance, wrapped in a thin jacket that barely shielded her from the wind. "Mama's asking for you," she said softly. "She's having trouble sleeping." Javier exhaled sharply, setting his tools down. His mother needed him. He'd deal with the rest tomorrow. But as he turned off the flickering light and locked up the garage, one thought haunted him. What if tomorrow wasn't any different? What if this was all there ever was? The night was unusually quiet. The hum of distant traffic barely reached the small garage, swallowed by the thick darkness stretching beyond the cracked pavement. Javier was locking up, his arms aching from hours of work when he heard it. A sputtering engine struggling to stay alive. The sound grew closer, dragging itself forward like a wounded animal until finally headlights cut through the dimly lit street. A car rolled into the lot, smooth and sleek despite its obvious distress. The engine coughed one last time before dying completely, leaving behind only silence. Javier frowned. This wasn't the kind of vehicle that usually found its way to his shop. Most of his customers drove cars held together by sheer willpower, patched up with cheap parts and prayers. But this was different. The car, a black luxury sedan with tinted windows, gleamed even under the weak yellow glow of the street lamp. It didn't belong in this part of town, and neither, he assumed, did its driver. The door opened with an effortless grace, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, poised, wrapped in a long coat that probably cost more than the entire garage. Even in the dim light, he could tell she wasn't like the people around here. There was something in the way she moved, unhurried, unbothered, as if she already knew the problem would be solved. Javier wiped his hands on a rag, approaching cautiously. "Car trouble?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. The woman glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It started overheating, then everything shut down. I barely made it here." Her voice was calm, steady. No frustration, no panic. Most people who rolled into his shop after a breakdown were either angry or desperate, but she seemed indifferent, like this was nothing more than an inconvenience. Javier studied the car for a moment. "You're lucky it didn't die out on the highway," he said. "Could have been stranded for hours." "I suppose so," she replied, glancing around as if taking in her unfamiliar surroundings. Javier popped the hood, feeling the heat still radiating from the engine. He muttered under his breath, "Radiator shot. Might have blown a gasket, too." She didn't react to the bad news, just nodded. "Can you fix it?" He hesitated. "Not tonight. I'd need parts. Best I can do is take a closer look and tell you what you're dealing with." For the first time, her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Then I suppose I'll have to wait." Javier raised an eyebrow. Most people would be frustrated, some would demand immediate service, but she just stood there, completely at ease, as if she had all the time in the world. Something about her didn't add up. Most people who drove cars like this didn't just happen upon a rundown garage in the middle of nowhere. They had roadside assistants, personal mechanics, a dozen people at their beck and call. But she was here, and for some reason she didn't seem in a hurry to leave. Javier wasn't the type to be easily impressed. He had seen his fair share of high-end cars driven by people who wouldn't so much as glance in his direction unless they needed something. He had learned early on that wealth had a way of making people forget the value of hard work. But as he leaned over the engine of Evelyn Sinclair's luxury sedan, wiping the sweat from his brow, he wasn't thinking about the expensive car or the kind of money she must have. He was thinking about the job in front of him, the way he always did. The radiator was fried, no question about it. The hoses were barely holding on, and if she had kept driving another few miles, she might have killed the whole engine. He worked quickly but carefully, his hands moving with practiced precision as he inspected every inch of the damage. It wasn't the worst job he had seen, but it wasn't a simple fix either. He stole a glance at Evelyn, who was standing nearby, watching him with a quiet, unreadable expression. Most customers either hovered nervously or asked a dozen questions. She did neither. She just observed, like she was studying him as much as he was studying the car. "You own this place?" she finally asked. Javier let out a dry chuckle. "I wish. Just work here." She nodded but didn't say anything else. Javier focused back on the engine. He knew he could drag this job out, upsell unnecessary parts, charge her triple just because she could afford it. A mechanic in the next town over had built his whole business on scamming people who didn't know any better. But Javier had never been like that. His father had taught him better. Do good work, be honest. Let the work speak for itself. After a few more minutes, he stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. "I can patch it up for now, but you'll need a proper replacement soon. I'll charge you for labor and parts, nothing more." Evelyn tilted her head, something flickering in her eyes. "That's all?" Javier frowned. "What else would I charge you for?" There was a pause. Then for the first time she smiled, a small, knowing smile. Most people wouldn't ask that question. Javier shrugged, ignoring the way her words made something tighten in his chest. "Most people aren't me." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a sleek black card, not a credit card, something else. She handed it to him. "In case you ever need anything." Javier took the card, glancing down at the name embossed in silver, Evelyn Sinclair. The name meant nothing to him, but something about the way she said it made him feel like it should. He tucked the card into his pocket without another thought. Just another customer, he told himself. just another job. But somehow, deep in his gut, he knew it wasn't that simple. Evelyn stood near the entrance of the garage, her arms crossed as she watched Javier work. The dim overhead light flickered every few seconds, barely illuminating the small space. The walls were lined with old shelves stacked with mismatched tools, some so worn down that their handles had splintered. The concrete floor was stained with years of oil and grease, and in the corner an ancient fan hummed weakly, barely stirring the thick air. She took it all in, the rusted toolboxes, the dented metal counter, the cracked glass on the office door. It was clear this place had seen better days, if it had ever seen good days at all. But what held her attention wasn't the garage. It was the man working inside it. Javier moved with a quiet efficiency, his hands steady and precise, despite the exhaustion she could see weighing on his shoulders. His uniform, once navy blue, had faded to a dull gray, grease stains permanently etched into the fabric. The collar was frayed, the sleeves rolled up to reveal arms that bore the marks of years of labor. Small cuts, faded scars, the kind of wear that came from working with machines that didn't forgive mistakes. She noticed the way he handled his tools, careful but firm, the way he double-checked his work before moving on. This wasn't someone who cut corners. This was a man who believed in doing things the right way, no matter how tired he was, no matter how little he had. A gust of wind blew through the open garage door, making the thin stack of invoices on the counter flutter. Evelyn glanced at them. Past due notices, final warnings, rent overdue, utility shut-off threats. She shifted her gaze back to Javier, who was completely unaware of her scrutiny. He didn't complain, didn't curse his luck, didn't ask for help. He just kept working, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand before tightening another bolt. Most people in his position would have tried to charge her double just because they could. He hadn't. Most people in his position would have taken one look at her and seen nothing but an easy payday. He hadn't. Instead, he had treated her like anyone else. No flattery, no desperation, just an honest man doing an honest job. Evelyn tapped her fingers against her arm, deep in thought. She had spent her life surrounded by men in tailored suits, people who talked about hard work but had never lifted anything heavier than a fountain pen. But here was a man who lived it, who worked himself to the bone for wages that barely kept him afloat. He had no idea who she was, no idea that she could change his life with a single phone call, and yet, as she watched him, something told her that, even if he knew, he wouldn't ask her to. Javier wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of motor oil and metal thick in the air. The job was done. The car that had limped into his shop hours earlier now purred smoothly, as if it had never broken down in the first place. He shut the hood with a firm click, stepping back as Evelyn approached. She moved with the same unshaken composure she had when she first arrived, her gaze steady, unreadable. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Javier scratched the back of his neck, calculating in his head. 200, covers the labor and parts. Evelyn pulled out a sleek leather wallet, the kind that cost more than his entire month's rent. Without hesitation, she pulled out a crisp stack of bills. Too much. Way too much. Javier stared at the money, his stomach tightening. She was offering him at least 5 times what he had asked for. His fingers itched at the sight of it. That kind of money could cover his mother's medication for months. It could take some pressure off his back, give him a break from the constant weight of not having enough. But it wasn't right. He exhaled slowly and shook his head. "I appreciate it, but that's too much." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "Consider it a tip." Javier crossed his arms. "I don't take tips like that." Most people would have argued. Some would have taken offense, demanding to know why he wouldn't just take the money. Others might have laughed, calling him a fool for turning down an easy payday. But Evelyn simply studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're struggling," she said finally, not as a question, but as a fact. Javier's jaw tensed. He didn't need charity. He didn't need anyone's pity. "I charge what's fair," he said firmly. No more, no less. Your car's fixed. That's all that matters." Silence stretched between them. A slow breeze drifted through the open garage, rattling an old sign hanging by the entrance. Then, to his surprise, Evelyn smiled. It wasn't the polite, distant smile he had expected, but something different, something thoughtful, amused even. "Most people wouldn't say no," she murmured. "I'm not most people," he said. She nodded, slipping the extra cash back into her wallet with an almost knowing expression. "No, you're not." Something about the way she said it made Javier shift uncomfortably, though he wasn't sure why. Evelyn tucked her wallet away and took one last look around the garage, her eyes lingering for a moment on the worn-out tools, the dim overhead lights, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Then, without another word, she turned toward her car. Javier watched as she slid into the driver's seat, the polished leather interior so starkly different from the oil-stained world he lived in. The engine roared to life, smooth and powerful. She could have left in that moment, driven away without looking back. But she didn't. Instead, she rolled down the window, resting her arm against the door as she met his gaze one last time. "I hope you call me someday," she said. Before Javier could ask what she meant, the tires rolled over the cracked pavement, the sleek black car disappearing into the night. He stood there long after she was gone, the crisp business card still clutched between his fingers. And for the first time in a long time, he had the strange feeling that his life was about to change. Javier leaned against the workbench, rubbing the tension from his hands. The job was done, but for some reason Evelyn hadn't left yet. Her car was running fine, purring like a beast waiting to be unleashed on the open road. But instead of driving off, she lingered, her eyes scanning the garage, taking in the worn-out shelves, the rusting tools, the single light flickering above them. "You've been working here long?" she asked, her tone casual. But there was something else beneath it, curiosity. Javier exhaled, running a hand through his messy dark hair. "Since I was 16, he admitted. Started as a kid running errands, cleaning tools, learned fast. By 18, I was fixing cars on my own." Evelyn nodded, watching him closely. "And now?" Javier let out a dry chuckle. "Now I fix cars, close up, go home, and do it all over again." There was no bitterness in his voice, just reality. This was his life. Work, worry, survive. No space for anything else. Evelyn tilted her head. "And that's enough for you?" Javier hesitated. His first instinct was to say yes, because what choice did he have? But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he found himself staring at a spot on the floor, his thoughts drifting somewhere else, somewhere far from this cramped garage. "I wanted to open my own shop one day," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Not something big, just a place where people wouldn't get scammed, where they knew they could trust the work being done, somewhere different from this." He glanced up, expecting her to look indifferent, maybe even bored, but she wasn't. She was watching him like his words actually mattered. "What stopped you?" she asked. Javier let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "Money, life. Every time I got close, something happened. My mom got sick, bills stacked up, savings disappeared overnight. Plans don't mean much when you're just trying to keep your head above water." Evelyn didn't respond right away. She just stood there, considering his words, like she was peeling back layers he hadn't even realized he was revealing. "You're a good mechanic," she finally said, "but I think that you're more than that." Javier frowned slightly, unsure what she meant. Before he could ask, she reached into her coat pocket, pulling out the sleek business card once more and placing it on the counter. "I meant what I said," she told him. "Call me if you ever need anything." Then, without another word, she turned, stepped into her car, and drove off into the night. Javier stared at the card, the black lettering standing out against the grime-covered counter. He told himself he wouldn't use it, but for the first time in a long time, a flicker of something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Hope. Javier didn't think much about the conversation as he cleaned up the garage for the night. To him, it was just another day, another customer, another car that needed fixing. He had gotten used to people coming and going, their problems temporarily solved before they disappeared from his life forever. But for some reason, this one felt different. Evelyn Sinclair wasn't like the usual faces that walked through his doors, and yet he had treated her the same. Because that's what he did. That's who he was. He tossed his dirty rag onto the counter and sighed, rolling his shoulders to ease the ache that had settled into his muscles after hours of work. He should be heading home, his mother was waiting, and his sister probably hadn't eaten yet. But his feet felt heavy, his mind still lingering on the sleek black business card sitting on the counter, untouched. It felt out of place here, in this dusty, grease-stained world of his, like it didn't belong. Outside, Evelyn sat in the driver's seat of her newly repaired car, but she hadn't left yet. Her fingers rested lightly against the steering wheel as she watched Javier through the windshield. He didn't notice her, too lost in his own thoughts, too weighed down by the exhaustion he tried to hide behind stubborn pride. She had met countless men in her life, businessmen in tailored suits, who knew how to smile and say the right things, who made promises they had no intention of keeping. Men who built fortunes on taking advantage of others. But Javier was different. He didn't put on an act, didn't change his demeanor the moment he realized who she was. He had treated her with the same quiet respect he gave to every customer. But what stood out most was his refusal of the money. She had seen struggling men before, men who would have snatched that extra cash without a second thought. But Javier had pushed it back, not out of pride, not even out of stubbornness, but because he truly believed in fairness, because it mattered to him that he did an honest job. That was rare. She watched as he ran a tired hand down his face, his shoulders sagging before he reached for his jacket. The weight of the world sat on him, pressing him down, yet he still stood tall. Evelyn inhaled deeply, glancing down at her phone. With one call, she could change everything for him. But that wasn't how this needed to happen. Javier wasn't the type to accept handouts. He needed to come to it on his own. So she put the car in drive and pulled away from the garage, leaving nothing behind except the business card on his counter and the thought that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Javier was locking up for the night when he heard the sound of heels clicking softly against the concrete. He turned to see Evelyn standing near the entrance of the garage, her sleek coat draped over her shoulders, the dim garage light casting long shadows across her face. She looked like she belonged in another world, one of high-rise buildings, private chauffeurs, and designer suits. Not here, not in a rundown shop reeking of motor oil and sweat. "You did good work tonight," she said, her voice calm, measured. Javier shrugged, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "Just doing my job." Evelyn studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at him. Not like he was just another mechanic, not like he was someone beneath her. She was looking at him like she saw something more, something even he didn't see in himself. She reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small black card. The kind that didn't just have a phone number, but carried weight, importance. Without hesitation, she set it down on the counter between them. "If you ever need anything," she said, tapping the card once before stepping back. Javier glanced down at it but didn't pick it up. The name embossed in silver stood out against the grime-covered surface. Evelyn Sinclair. No title, no explanation, just a number. His fingers twitched at his sides. He had seen rich people before, the way they threw around their influence, using money to fix problems the way mechanics used wrenches. He had no idea what kind of help she was offering, but he didn't like the idea of owing anyone anything. "I don't take handouts," he said, voice firm. Evelyn's lips curved ever so slightly. "I didn't say it was a handout." He narrowed his eyes. "Then what is it?" She tilted her head, considering her answer before finally saying, "A door, if you ever want to walk through it." Javier felt something shift in his chest, a quiet pull of something unfamiliar. But he wasn't ready for whatever it was she was offering. He crossed his arms. "I'll keep that in mind." Evelyn held his gaze for a long moment before nodding, as if she expected that response. Without another word, she turned, stepping back into her car. The engine purred to life, and within seconds she was gone, swallowed by the night. Javier stood there long after the taillights had disappeared, staring down at the card still sitting on the counter. He told himself he'd throw it away, but for some reason, he didn't. The night air was heavy with the scent of oil and exhaust as Javier leaned against the counter, watching the taillights of the black sedan fade into the distance. The quiet hum of the engine disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the soft buzz of the flickering overhead light and the distant hum of the city beyond the garage doors. He exhaled, shaking his head as he turned back inside. Just another day, just another customer. The business card still sat on the counter, untouched. Its crisp edges looked out of place against the stained surface, the silver letters catching the dim light like something that didn't belong in a place like this. He wasn't sure why he hadn't tossed it in the trash yet. Javier grabbed a wrench off the workbench, more out of habit than necessity, rolling it between his fingers. He had seen all kinds of people walk through this garage. The desperate, the angry, the entitled. People who begged for a discount. People who acted like they owned the world just because they could afford a car that cost more than his entire existence. Evelyn Sinclair wasn't like them. She had money, that much was obvious. But she hadn't flaunted it. She hadn't demanded special treatment, hadn't tried to throw her weight around. She had just watched, listened. And then, for some reason he still couldn't quite figure out, she had left him with that card. Javier scoffed under his breath, setting the wrench down with a clatter. It didn't matter. Nothing was going to change. Rich people passed through places like this all the time. They came, they got what they needed, and they left. And tomorrow, the cycle would start all over again. He locked up the garage, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets as he stepped out onto the cracked pavement. The night was cold, the kind of cold that settled deep in his bones. Home was only a few blocks away, but it felt like a world apart. His mother was waiting, Sophia too. Another night of worry, another morning of exhaustion. Javier took one last glance at the shop before turning toward the empty streets. The card was still sitting on the counter when he left, but something in his gut told him that, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, this wasn't just another day. The morning sun barely cut through the grime-streaked windows of the garage, casting a dull, lifeless light over the workbenches. The place smelled of old grease and rust, the familiar scent of a day about to start. Javier stood by the counter, wiping down tools, the rhythm of the task almost calming him. It had been a long few days, but it was nothing new. His mind was still preoccupied with the strange encounter with Evelyn, the card, and the lingering sense that something had shifted in him. But there was no time for that now. The bills weren't going to pay themselves. "Javier, we need to talk." His boss, Miguel, appeared in the doorway, his face tight, as though the weight of the world had just dropped onto his shoulders. Javier raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. Miguel rarely called for talks unless it was bad news. Miguel took a seat on the worn-out bench, his hands running over the stubble on his chin, his eyes distant. Javier waited, but the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "It's not good," Miguel finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been trying to cover the costs of the garage for months, but we're bleeding money. Repairs are down, rent's overdue again, and I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this place open." Javier's stomach dropped. His hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. "What do you mean? You're saying the garage might close?" Miguel nodded, his eyes never meeting Javier's. "I can't keep floating this. We're not pulling in enough to pay the bills, and the landlord's threatening eviction." He let out a slow, defeated breath. "I'm sorry, Javier, but I don't think there's much else I can do." Javier's heart pounded in his chest. The garage, this place, this was all he had. It wasn't much, but it was his only source of income. Without it, he didn't know what he'd do. He couldn't just walk away, not with his mother sick and his sister depending on him. "You can't be serious," Javier said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been through rough patches before, but this is different. How are we supposed to survive without this place?" Miguel stood up, rubbing his hands together as if the motion might erase the heaviness in the air. "I don't have the answer, Javier. But I'll be honest with you. If we don't make a major change, I don't know how much longer we'll last." Javier's mind raced. He couldn't lose this place. He couldn't lose everything he had fought for, but deep down, he knew the truth. Nothing was guaranteed, and sometimes even the hardest work didn't save you from the harshest realities. He stared at the counter, his thoughts a jumble of fear and anger. "I'll figure something out," he muttered, more to himself than to Miguel. "There's got to be a way." But as he watched his boss walk away, the weight of uncertainty pressed down harder than ever. Javier stepped through the door of the small, dimly lit apartment, the familiar creak of the wooden floor underfoot. A stark reminder of how much had changed over the years. The smell of old medicine and stale air clung to the walls, a constant presence that felt more suffocating every day. His mother was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, a blanket draped over her frail shoulders, her once vibrant eyes now dull, hollow. She didn't move when he entered, just stared out at the empty street beyond, her mind far away. Javier's heart sank as he set down his bag and walked over to her. He crouched beside her chair, placing a gentle hand on her thin, cold fingers. "Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse with the weight of the words he didn't want to say, "how are you feeling today?" She turned her head slowly, her lips curling into a faint smile. "I'm fine, mijo, just tired." He didn't believe her. He hadn't believed her for months now. The truth was, every day she was slipping further away, her body growing weaker as the cancer slowly consumed her. The doctors had given up hope, told him there was nothing more they could do. But he couldn't accept that. He wouldn't. Not yet. Javier glanced over at the pile of unopened medical bills on the coffee table, each one more daunting than the last. He had tried to keep up, tried to pay whatever he could, but it was never enough. The insurance didn't cover nearly as much as they had promised, and the out-of-pocket expenses were astronomical. He had borrowed money from friends, sold anything of value that wasn't nailed down. But now, with the garage on the brink of closing, he didn't know where else to turn. "Javier," his mother said softly, her voice shaking him from his thoughts, "you're working too hard. You need to rest. You're tired." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Mama. You don't need to worry about me." But the truth was, he didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending everything was okay. Every time he looked at her, it felt like the walls were closing in, the weight of his responsibilities pushing down on him harder. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't. Javier stood up, walking over to the stack of bills again, his hands trembling as he picked them up one by one. His mind raced. How much longer could he keep this up? How long could he keep the facade intact? But as he looked at the past due notices, the red stamps that screamed urgency, he knew the answer. It wasn't long, not long at all. The door to their world was closing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Javier sat on the edge of the worn-out couch, his fingers drumming nervously against the armrest. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. His mother was asleep in her chair, the slow rise and fall of her chest the only sign that she was still with him. But even that didn't bring him peace anymore. Every breath she took felt like a countdown, a reminder that time was running out for them both. He glanced over at the small stack of bills on the coffee table again, the overdue rent, the final notice from the utility company, the medical bills that seemed to grow in number with each passing day. His heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how many hours he put in at the garage, it was never enough. He was drowning, and every attempt to keep his head above water only pulled him deeper. His mind kept drifting back to Evelyn's business card, still sitting on the counter where he had left it days ago. The silver lettering caught his eye again, gleaming in the low light like a lifeline he didn't want to reach for. Her words echoed in his mind. "If you ever need anything." He hadn't wanted to call. He had told himself over and over that he didn't need anyone's help, that he could figure it out, that he had to. He had worked too hard to get to this point just to rely on someone else. But now, as he sat in the silence of the apartment, the weight of his situation pressing down on him, he realized he had no other options. His phone sat on the table in front of him, the number on the card burned into his mind. Just one call, one moment of weakness. Would she help him? Or was he just another charity case to her, another poor soul looking for a handout? But what choice did he have? His mother's health was deteriorating faster than the doctors had warned, and every day was a battle to keep her comfortable, to keep her fighting. And then there was the garage. Miguel's news had hit him like a gut punch. If the shop closed, Javier had nothing left, no way to pay the bills, no way to keep his mother's treatments going. He stared at the phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. His breath came in shallow gasps, the pressure mounting. One call, one decision. With a shaking hand, he dialed the number. The phone rang, each tone growing louder in his ears. He swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. It picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was cool, professional. Nothing like the soft, reassuring tone he remembered, but still it carried the weight of the possibility he had been avoiding. I need help," he said, his voice thick with the emotion he had been holding back for her so long. "I don't know what else to do." There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched on too long, and then, finally, her voice came through the line, calm and steady. "I'll help you, Javier." Javier stared at the phone in his hand, his heart racing in his chest. The number on the business card had been staring at him for days, mocking him with its simplicity. He had told himself over and over that he didn't need to call, that he could solve his problems on his own. But every day felt like a losing battle. His mother's health was deteriorating. The garage was on the verge of closing, and the bills kept piling up higher and higher. The weight of it all was crushing him, and he knew that if he didn't do something soon, everything he had worked for would be gone. He couldn't keep pretending that he didn't need help. He couldn't keep fighting a battle he was losing. Swallowing his pride, he punched the number into his phone, the digits almost feeling foreign in his hands. The phone rang, and each tone felt like a countdown to something he wasn't ready for. He wasn't sure what he expected, maybe a cold, dismissive voice, maybe even a simple rejection. But when the line finally clicked, it wasn't Evelyn's voice that greeted him. "Hello, this is Karen, Miss Sinclair's assistant. How may I assist you today?" Javier froze, his mind going blank. He hadn't expected this. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He had assumed Evelyn was just someone who ran a business, but hearing her referred to as Miss Sinclair, with all the authority and professionalism that title commanded, hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't just a woman who had been kind enough to give him her card. This was someone who lived in an entirely different world than he did. I need to speak with Miss Sinclair," Javier said, his voice more strained than he meant it to be. "It's important," Karen's voice was polite, almost too polite. "Miss Sinclair is a very busy woman. May I ask what this is in regard to?" Javier swallowed hard, his nerves tightening with every word. He had never been one to ask for help, especially not from someone like Evelyn Sinclair, but the desperation in his chest made it impossible to turn back now. It's about a job," he said, though the words didn't feel right. The truth was, he didn't know what he was asking for. A handout? A loan? A chance to rebuild? He couldn't even form the words. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "I see," Karen said, her tone suddenly more professional. "I will inform Miss Sinclair of your request, and she will get back to you as soon as she can. Please hold for a moment." Javier's breath hitched in his throat as the hold music played in his ear. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the call to go this far. And now, sitting there in the dim apartment with nothing but the faint sound of his mother's shallow breathing in the background, he wondered if he had just made a mistake he couldn't undo. He should have walked away. He should have let it go. But it was too late now. And as he waited for Evelyn or Miss Sinclair to pick up the phone, he realized that this one call might change everything. The call had been brief, and yet it had left Javier reeling. Karen had been polite, efficient, and just professional enough to make him feel small without meaning to. But it was Evelyn's words, the ones that came through after, that left him unsettled. "I'd like to meet with you, Javier. Please come to my office in the city tomorrow. There are things we need to discuss." The phone call had ended before he could respond, and now, sitting on the edge of the couch, he was left to digest what that invitation meant. The city, the heart of everything he wasn't. He had never set foot in a building like the one he imagined she worked in, let alone walk through its polished doors to have a conversation with someone like her. The city was a world of sharp suits, glass towers, and people who spoke like they already knew the outcome of everything. It was a world so far from his own, a place where men and women like him had no place. He felt like a fraud just thinking about it. The next day, he found himself standing outside a towering glass building, its surface reflecting the cloudless sky. The doorman gave him a glance, and just like that, he felt out of place. But before he could second-guess himself, he straightened his shoulders and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was as polished as everything else he had imagined. Marble floors gleamed under the lights, and sleek modern furniture sat in every corner. The receptionist, her face perfectly composed, greeted him immediately. "May I help you?" "I'm here to see Miss Sinclair," he said, trying to ignore the way his throat tightened with every word. She glanced at her computer for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. I'll let her know you've arrived." He sat down, his legs restless under the sterile silence of the lobby. His mind was racing. What did she want? Was this a job offer or something else? He had told himself he wouldn't take charity, and yet here he was, about to walk into a building that screamed privilege and wealth. He wasn't sure if he even belonged here. When the receptionist called his name, he stood up, his legs stiff as if they hadn't moved in hours. She led him through a series of gleaming hallways, past offices with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and into a sleek, modern conference room. Evelyn was already there, sitting at the head of the long table. She didn't look surprised to see him, as if she had expected him all along. She rose from her seat with that quiet, assured grace, offering him a smile that held no trace of pity. "Javier, I'm glad you came," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I have an idea I think might help you." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was still trying to process the fact that he was here, in front of a woman who had everything, and yet, somehow, had invited him into her world. Javier's heart pounded as the car navigated the city streets, the towering buildings around him stretching higher than he had ever imagined. He had grown up in a small town where the tallest structure was the old church steeple, where the sound of car horns and busy traffic was a distant dream, never a reality. The city felt like a world on its own, one that he had never believed he could be a part of. His hands gripped the armrest as the car took sharp turns and the driver expertly maneuvered through the chaos of honking taxis and cyclists weaving through the streets. Javier barely registered the passing scenery, his mind still caught on the fact that he was heading to a meeting with Evelyn Sinclair. The taxi finally stopped in front of a building that seemed to touch the sky, its glass facade gleaming in the midday sun. Javier's eyes followed its towering structure, the sheer magnitude of it leaving him breathless. He had seen skyscrapers in movies, of course, but standing in front of one was an entirely different thing. His stomach twisted with uncertainty as the driver opened the door for him. The sound of the car doors slamming shut seemed far too loud in this massive urban landscape. Javier walked to the entrance, unsure of what he was doing here, but unable to turn back now. The doors opened with a soft swish, and as he stepped inside, the chill of the air conditioning hit him like a wave. He looked around in awe. The lobby was pristine, a sleek design with polished marble floors and modern artwork that could have belonged in a gallery. Employees in sharp suits moved quickly through the space, each one with a sense of purpose that made Javier feel like an intruder. His dirty shoes and faded jacket stood out in stark contrast to the polished professional environment. He felt a gnawing discomfort, as though he didn't belong here. The elevator doors opened, and Javier stepped inside, the sleek brushed steel walls reflecting his nervous expression. As the elevator ascended, his stomach dropped further, the rising sensation in his chest matching the height of the building. When the doors opened again, he was met by a sleek, immaculate office space with floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of the city was breathtaking, almost dizzying, but it wasn't the view that took his breath away. It was the massive banner hanging across the far wall, a golden logo shimmering under the sunlight. Sinclair Enterprises, Evelyn's name, the same name that had been printed on the business card she had handed him in the garage. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had known she was wealthy, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. She wasn't just rich. She was one of the richest women in the country. A woman whose empire reached higher than any tower in the city, whose wealth was something he couldn't even fathom. And here he was, standing in her world, feeling smaller than ever. Javier stood there, his feet rooted to the polished floors of the conference room, staring at Evelyn as she sat across from him. The sleek glass walls of her office framed the view of the city below, but Javier wasn't looking at the skyline anymore. His mind was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. From stepping into the massive building to seeing her name splashed across that banner to this moment, this surreal moment where Evelyn Sinclair, a woman who could have anyone she wanted, was talking to him like he belonged here. "I've been following your work, Javier," she said, her voice calm yet firm. She wasn't looking at him, her gaze focused on the laptop in front of her as she typed something, almost like she was preparing him for something big. "You've got something most people don't." She looked up then, locking eyes with him. "Integrity. You don't compromise on your values, no matter what." Javier shifted in his seat, unsure of what to say. He was just a mechanic, barely scraping by, yet here she was, treating him like he was someone important. It felt strange, almost like he didn't belong in this world. Evelyn leaned forward, her tone becoming more serious. "I'm starting a new venture, an auto repair chain, but not just any chain. A chain that focuses on honesty, on fair pricing, on integrity. No gimmicks, no overcharging, just good, honest work. People are tired of being ripped off by unscrupulous mechanics and repair shops. I've seen the way you work, Javier. You've got the skills, but more importantly, you've got the character. That's why I want you to run it." Javier's breath caught in his chest. The words barely registered in his mind. Run it. He couldn't even imagine what that would mean. This wasn't just another job. It was a chance to build something, to change everything. "Me?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I don't know anything about running a business. I fix cars, that's all I know. I've never managed anything bigger than a small garage." Evelyn smiled, the corner of her lips lifting slightly. "That's why I'm here. I've got the resources, the infrastructure. I need someone who understands the value of honesty in this business. Someone who isn't motivated by greed, someone who wants to do things the right way. You've already proven that." She paused, her eyes searching his. "I want you to run this. You'd have the support, the backing. I believe in you, Javier." Javier's heart raced, his mind a blur of confusion and disbelief. Was she serious? Did she really think he could do this? Was he even capable of stepping into a role like this? A man who had spent his life just scraping by, trying to survive, now being asked to run a business. a business that could change everything. He swallowed, his throat dry. But why me? There are plenty of people more qualified for this than I am. Because, Evelyn said softly, I'm looking for someone who understands the struggle, who hasn't forgotten what it's like to fight for every dime. I don't need someone with experience. I need someone with heart, someone who knows that people don't just want cheap repairs. They want to be treated with respect. Javier's hands trembled as he ran them over his face, trying to process everything. He had always dreamed of something more, but he never thought it would come like this. Never thought it would come from a woman like her. The reality of what she was offering him started to sink in, and with it came a flood of emotion. Could he do this? Could he really leave behind everything he knew to build something new? The thought of running this business, of having the chance to prove himself, made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. I don't know what to say, he finally managed. Evelyn's smile deepened, like she already knew what his answer would be. Say yes, Javier. I'm giving you a chance to change your life, to change your family's life, to do something that matters. And in that moment, Javier knew there was no going back. Javier sat in the sleek leather chair, the weight of Evelyn's words pressing down on him like a heavy fog. He had been sitting there for what felt like an eternity, but the city outside the glass walls seemed to move on without him, indifferent to the chaos brewing inside his head. He had just been offered the chance of a lifetime, a chance to change everything, but it felt like a cruel joke. Why him? What had she seen in him that was worth this kind of opportunity? His mind raced, images of his life flashing before him, his small garage, the rusted tools, his worn-out clothes. He wasn't someone who belonged in a world like this. He wasn't a businessman, not in any sense of the word. He could fix cars, sure. He knew how to get his hands dirty, how to work through the grease and the grime, but this, running an auto repair chain, that was a whole different world, one he wasn't sure he even understood. Evelyn's gaze was steady, expectant, like she was waiting for him to make a decision that could change everything. But all he could feel was doubt, a gnawing uncertainty deep in his gut. Why me? The question escaped his lips before he could stop it. His voice was rough, quieter than he intended. There's plenty of people more qualified for this than I am. Why me? Evelyn didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, even as her eyes softened. Because I see what you have, Javier. I see your integrity, your work ethic. People can teach you business, they can teach you the numbers, the marketing, the structure, but they can't teach you what you already have. You've spent your life building something with nothing. You know what it's like to struggle, to fight for what you have. That's something you can't teach. Her words lingered in the air, but they didn't bring him peace. Instead, they felt like a reminder of everything he wasn't. He had never had the kind of privilege she had. He had never been groomed for something like this. It wasn't just the business that scared him. It was the responsibility, the idea of suddenly being thrust into a position where everything rested on his shoulders. What if he failed? What if he let everyone down? What if he wasn't good enough? His thoughts spiraled, each one pulling him further into doubt. He wanted this. He wanted to believe that he could be the man she saw, but the weight of his past, of his struggles, was too heavy. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of hard work. He wasn't meant to sit in an office like this. He wasn't meant to lead a team of people, to run a business that could affect so many lives. He was just Javier, the mechanic who barely got by. And yet, Evelyn's words hung in the air. You've spent your life building something with nothing. Maybe that's what terrified him most, the idea that he had spent so long surviving, always waiting for the next crisis to hit, that he had never truly taken the chance to change his own life. Javier, Evelyn's voice cut through his thoughts, gentle but firm. This is your chance to change everything, to build something real, something that matters. He looked up at her, the weight of the decision bearing down on him. And for the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't just afraid of failure. He was afraid of success, afraid of becoming someone he didn't recognize. Javier's mind was spinning, caught in a whirlwind of doubt and fear. The room felt like it was closing in on him, the towering glass windows that framed the city beyond, mocking him with their distance from his reality. He had worked his entire life just to get by, surviving from paycheck to paycheck, and now Evelyn was offering him something that felt impossible. A chance to leave it all behind, to step into a world where success wasn't a constant struggle. But the thought of walking into that world, of stepping out of everything he had ever known, felt like a gamble he wasn't sure he could take. Evelyn watched him carefully, her gaze unwavering as he wrestled with himself. She had already seen the hesitation, the doubt in his eyes, but she wasn't about to let him back away from this. She knew what he was capable of, knew it in a way that was clearer than any business plan or projection. This wasn't about experience or expertise. It was about something much deeper. "Javier," she said, her voice calm, but there was a weight to it that caught his attention. He met her eyes, and for the first time since he had walked into this office, he felt like she was speaking directly to him, not just a business deal or a potential hire, but to the man who had spent years working in a garage, fixing cars for people who didn't appreciate it. "I'm not looking for someone with years of experience in business. I'm looking for someone with integrity." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What did she mean? He had spent so much of his life being told that experience was everything, that without the right background, he'd never get a chance. But here she was, telling him that wasn't what mattered. "You see, Javier," Evelyn continued, her tone steady and sure, "I've been around people who can talk the talk, who know all the right moves, who've been to the best schools, sat in the right rooms. But none of that matters if you can't be trusted. None of it matters if you don't have the backbone to do the right thing when no one's looking." Javier swallowed, his throat dry. "But I'm just a mechanic," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know anything about running a business. I don't even know where to start." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "You're not just a mechanic, Javier. You're someone who has built everything you have with your hands. You've worked for it. And that's the kind of person I want to lead this company. Not someone who learned everything from a textbook, but someone who knows what it means to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Someone who knows what it's like to struggle, to sacrifice. That's what will make this work. That's why I believe you're the one for this job." Javier felt the weight of her words settling into his chest, heavier than anything he had ever felt. For a moment, the world outside the office, the towering city, everything else faded away. It was just him and her in this room, and he realized she wasn't just offering him a job. She was offering him a chance to prove something to himself, to step out of the shadows and into something that could change everything. The thought terrified him, but at the same time it sparked something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. A quiet hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance he had been waiting for all along. Javier took a slow, steady breath, the weight of the decision still heavy, but for the first time he felt the possibility of something greater. "Okay," he said, his voice firm, despite the fear that still clawed at him. "I'll do it. I'll run the business." Evelyn's lips curved into a small smile. "I knew you would." Javier stood there, the weight of his decision settling over him like a heavy cloak. The words had left his mouth before he even fully understood what they meant. "I'll do it. I'll run the business." It wasn't just a commitment to Evelyn. It was a commitment to himself, to everything he had ever wanted, but never thought he deserved. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and for a moment he was paralyzed by the enormity of the choice he had just made. He had no idea what it would mean to step into this world, to leave the grease and grime of the garage behind and become something entirely different. But as he looked at Evelyn, her unwavering confidence, her belief in him, something inside him stirred. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a lifeline. He had spent his entire life fighting, scrabbling, for every scrap of stability. But now, standing here, he realized that the fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The idea of leading a business, of running something that could grow and thrive, terrified him. He wasn't a businessman. He wasn't anything like the people in those sleek offices. But deep down, he knew one thing. If he didn't take this leap, he would always wonder what might have been. Evelyn's smile widened as she stood, walking around the table and extending her hand. "Welcome to the team, Javier. You're going to do great things. I have no doubt about that." He hesitated for just a second, the magnitude of the moment flooding his senses. But then, without another thought, he shook her hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who believed in him in a way he never had before. As he stepped back, a mix of emotions swirled within him: fear, excitement, uncertainty, and something else: hope. He had always wondered what it would feel like to have a shot at something bigger than himself, something that mattered. Now, as he looked out of the office's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below him like an endless sea of opportunity. This was it. This was his chance. He wasn't sure where it would take him, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to find out. "Let's do this," Javier said more to himself than to anyone else. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be countless moments of doubt and struggle. But at that moment, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet, steady confidence that maybe, just maybe, he was ready for this, ready to fight, not just for survival, but for something he could finally build for himself. And as Evelyn turned toward him, her eyes sharp with purpose, Javier knew that whatever happened next, he wasn't alone. He had taken the first step into a world he never thought possible, and there was no turning back. Javier sat at the long conference table, his palms slick with sweat, as he gripped the edge of the smooth, polished surface. The voices around him blended together in a haze of jargon and business terms that felt foreign, as if he had stepped into another world altogether. He had always known that this would be hard, but nothing could have prepared him for the suffocating feeling of being completely out of his element. The other people in the room, the executives and managers from different departments, were confident in their crisp suits, discussing budgets, projections, and strategies with an ease that made Javier feel small. His hands, still rough from years of working with tools, seemed out of place on the glass table, which looked as if it had never known the wear of hard work. He tried to listen, tried to keep up, but the words they used, terms like market share, return on investment, and scalability, seemed to float around him, ungraspable. Evelyn, seated at the head of the table, noticed his discomfort but didn't say anything. Her eyes were steady as she spoke, but Javier couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing somehow. She had brought him here to lead, to change the way things were done, but all he could do was nod and pretend he understood. He had no formal training in business, no experience in these corporate spaces. All he had was his integrity, his grit, and his unwillingness to give up. But was that enough? "Javier, do you have any thoughts on this?" Evelyn's voice cut through the haze, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. All eyes turned to him, waiting. The room fell silent, his throat tightened. He had to say something, anything. The silence stretched, suffocating him, until he cleared his throat. I think we need to remember what this company was built on," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "It wasn't built on cutting corners. It was built on trust. People come to us because they know they're not going to get ripped off. We can't lose that." The room shifted. Some faces glanced at each other, unsure. But Evelyn's gaze softened, and for a moment he felt like he might have said something right. Still, the weight of the meeting was overwhelming. Every moment felt like he was walking a tightrope, unsure of which direction to go. After the meeting ended, Javier slipped back into his office, his hands shaking as he sat behind his desk. The glass walls seemed to close in on him, and he stared at the papers in front of him, feeling a growing sense of panic. He wasn't sure what the next step was. He wasn't sure how to take what he had learned in the garage, in the trenches, and apply it here, in this cold, sterile world of business. Javier ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This was harder than he had ever imagined. He had been thrown into the deep end, expected to swim, but it felt like he was drowning. He had no idea how to turn this ship around, how to meet Evelyn's expectations, how to make this business succeed without losing himself in the process. The door to his office opened, and Evelyn stepped inside. She stood quietly for a moment, watching him struggle, before she spoke. "It's not going to be easy, Javier, but I believe in you. You're not here because of your business knowledge. You're here because you have something rare. You know how to lead with honesty. Don't forget that." He nodded, but her words did little to ease the anxiety that gripped him. This was his chance, his one shot. And right now, it didn't feel like he was anywhere near ready. Javier sat across from Evelyn in the sleek, glass-walled office, feeling the weight of her gaze on him. The soft hum of the city outside barely filtered through the walls, but inside, the room felt charged with a quiet intensity. He had never been one to ask for help, had always relied on his instincts and hard work to get by, but sitting in front of Evelyn now, he realized how much he had yet to learn. "You're doing well," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. She studied the financial projections on the screen in front of them, her fingers lightly tapping on the table. "But remember, numbers and strategy aren't the only thing that matters. People matter. The team, the customers, your values. Keep them at the core of what you do." Javier nodded, trying to focus on the spreadsheets in front of him, but the numbers danced in his mind, blurring into something he couldn't quite grasp. It was overwhelming. All of it, the decisions, the pressure to succeed, the constant fear of failing. He had always been a mechanic, a fixer of things. Now, he was asked to fix a business, to lead a company. But it didn't feel like something he was equipped to handle. "Evelyn, I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. "This whole corporate world, it's not me. I don't know how to talk like them. I don't know how to make these decisions." Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't look at him with pity or judgment. She just leaned back in her chair, eyes steady. "Javier, you've been leading people your entire life, whether you realized it or not. You've built trust with customers who had no reason to trust you. You've led by example, by showing up, by doing the work. That's the foundation of leadership. The rest comes with time. You don't need to be perfect right now." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always thought leadership was about confidence, about having the answers, but maybe it was more than that. Maybe it was about understanding people, about showing up when it counted, about not losing sight of what really mattered. He had built his life around honesty, around doing what was right even when no one was looking. Wasn't that what he needed to bring into this new world? "Start small," Evelyn continued, her tone softening. "Focus on the people you're leading. Listen to them. Help them grow, and you'll grow with them. Trust yourself. You have what it takes." Javier swallowed hard, his chest tight. He had never been one to doubt his work ethic, but everything here felt so big, so unfamiliar. But Evelyn was right. He couldn't lose sight of who he was, of what had brought him here in the first place. He had always believed in honesty, in fairness. He didn't need to become someone else to succeed. He just needed to trust the person he already was. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. He met her gaze, feeling the weight of her mentorship, but also the weight of responsibility that came with it. "I'll do it. I'll make it work." Evelyn smiled, and for the first time since walking into this world of corporate meetings and towering buildings, Javier felt something inside him settle. Maybe he wasn't so out of place after all. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he could lead with the same integrity that had always been his foundation. And with Evelyn's guidance, he finally believed he could build something bigger than just a business. He could build a legacy. The day of the grand opening was colder than expected, with a sharp wind cutting through the city streets. But inside the new auto shop, the warmth was palpable. Javier stood at the entrance, his fingers slightly trembling as he adjusted the collar of his jacket. The place was buzzing with activity, workers huddled in groups, customers trickling in, their eyes wide with curiosity, unsure of what to expect. But to Javier, it was more than just the opening of a business. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the chance to prove to himself and to the world that this vision, this dream, could be real. He had spent weeks getting everything ready, working late nights, meeting with suppliers, hiring staff, and training them to do things the right way. Every part of this shop, from the freshly painted walls to the polished tools on the workbenches, was a symbol of everything he had built from the ground up. But it wasn't just about the physical space, it was about the reputation they had worked so hard to create. This wasn't going to be just another corporate repair shop with inflated prices and empty promises. This place would be different. It had to be. As the first customer walked through the door, Javier felt his heart race. The man was middle-aged, his face a mixture of skepticism and hope. Javier approached him, offering a genuine smile. "Welcome. How can we help you today?" The man eyed him cautiously. "I've heard you're the only place in the city that actually tells the truth about what's wrong with your car," he said, his voice filled with both doubt and curiosity. Javier nodded, the words coming to him almost instinctively. "We don't just fix cars here, we fix trust." He gestured to the clean, well-lit waiting area where fresh coffee sat on a counter and newspapers were neatly stacked. "We'll tell you exactly what your car needs, no more, no less. No upselling, no unnecessary repairs." The man studied him for a moment, and then something changed in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, maybe even relief. "All right, let's see if you're as good as they say." Hours passed, and the shop quickly filled with customers, each one more impressed than the last. Word was spreading faster than Javier had anticipated. People came in, unsure, but left satisfied, knowing they hadn't been taken for a ride. It wasn't just the fair pricing that set them apart. It was the honesty that flowed through everything they did. Javier watched quietly proud as his staff worked with precision, as they took the time to explain the repairs to each customer, to show them exactly what was wrong, and offer solutions that made sense. As the day wore on, the buzz in the shop intensified. By the time the doors closed, the shop had exceeded expectations, and Javier found himself standing in the middle of the floor, surrounded by the quiet hum of satisfaction. The staff was exhausted, but their faces reflected the same sense of accomplishment that Javier felt deep in his chest. This wasn't just a business. It was the beginning of something bigger, a new way of doing things. Evelyn had been right all along. The values he had built his life on, honesty, integrity, hard work, were what would set this shop apart. As he looked around at the new customers who were now regulars, at the trust they had earned, Javier finally believed that they could do more than just survive. They could thrive. The first branch was a success, but it was just the start. This was only the beginning of the change he had always dreamed of. And for the first time, Javier felt a sense of certainty in his future, in what he was building, and in the legacy he was about to create. The evening air was colder than usual as Javier stepped into the quiet hospital room, his heart pounding in his chest. His mother was lying in the bed, her thin frame barely visible beneath the blanket, her face pale, her breaths shallow. It had been months since the diagnosis, months since they had run out of options, and yet, here they were. But this time, everything was different. This time, Javier wasn't just struggling to make ends meet. This time, he had the means to do something. He looked down at her, his mother's tired eyes slowly fluttering open as he approached. She smiled weakly, reaching out a frail hand, and he took it in his own, squeezing it gently. "Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I've found a way to get you the treatment you deserve." Her eyes blinked, a flash of confusion, and then something softer, something more hopeful. "What do you mean, mijo?" Her voice was a raspy whisper, as if speaking took more energy than she could give. Javier sat beside her, his chest tight with the weight of the moment. "I've arranged for you to see a specialist, the best one in the city. They'll take care of you." He could barely get the words out. The feeling of finally being able to help her, of finally being able to provide the treatment she had been denied for so long, was overwhelming. He had spent his life watching her struggle, watching her give everything she had for him and Sofia, and now, finally, he could give her something in return. Her eyes softened, tears welling up as she looked at him. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You've already done so much." Javier leaned in, brushing the hair from her face gently. "No, Mama. You deserve the best. You deserve to feel better, to not have to worry about anything. I won't let anything stand in your way." As they sat there together, the reality of what he had achieved settled in. The new job, the auto shop, the success, none of it mattered as much as this. He had finally been able to take care of her, to make sure she had the best possible chance, the treatment that could give her more time, more years to be with him and Sofia. The weight on his shoulders didn't vanish, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was standing taller. His success wasn't just about the money or the prestige. It was about this moment, about providing the people he loved with what they needed, what they deserved. Later that evening, as he walked into his sister Sofia's room, he found her hunched over a pile of textbooks, her focus unwavering despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "How's school going?" Javier asked, sitting beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She looked up, a tired smile spreading across her face. "It's hard, but I'm doing it. I know I have to." Javier nodded, feeling his chest tighten with pride. "I've been able to set aside some money for your education," he said quietly. "You're going to go as far as you want. No more worrying about paying for it. I'll make sure you can focus on what you love." Her eyes widened with surprise, then quickly softened as tears welled in her eyes. "Javi, you didn't have to do that." He squeezed her shoulder, a small but firm gesture. "I want to. You've worked so hard, and you deserve to have everything you need to succeed." As Javier stood by the window that night, looking out over the city that had become his world, he felt something shift deep inside him. He had always worked hard, but this, the feeling of finally being able to give back, of finally being able to take care of his family, of giving Sofia the chance to build her future, this was more than he had ever hoped for. He wasn't just fixing cars anymore. He was fixing his family's future, and for the first time, it felt like everything was falling into place. Javier stood at the entrance of the old garage, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The familiar scent of oil and grease still lingered in the air, a scent that had once been his world. The garage was empty now, the overhead lights flickering faintly, casting long shadows across the bare concrete floors. The walls, once filled with tools and parts in every corner, now stood stripped and silent. It was closing for good. The notice had been posted a week ago, the final blow to a place that had been more than just a job to him. It had been home. He looked around, memories flooding his mind, each one hitting harder than the last. This was where it all started. The days and nights spent working on cars for customers who barely acknowledged him, the sweat, the exhaustion, the endless cycle of repairs that never seemed to end. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it had been his fight, his struggle. Javier ran a hand over the worn countertop, feeling the rough surface under his fingers. This place had been built with nothing but his hands. He had turned this cramped, decrepit garage into something that had kept him afloat for years. But now, as he stood there, he knew it was time for a change. The decision had been a hard one. The garage had been the place where his dreams had first taken shape. It had been his foundation. But it was also a reminder of everything he had outgrown. The business had been a struggle from the start. All was teetering on the edge of survival, And no matter how hard he worked, it had never been enough. But it wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what he could do now. He wasn't the same man who had first walked through that door, the man with nothing but the hope of building a better life. He was someone else now, someone who had learned, who had grown. And he knew what he had to do. Javier took out his phone, his fingers tapping the screen as he called the real estate agent. The plan had been in his mind for months, but now it was time to make it real. "I'm buying the building," he said, his voice steady, determined. "I'll need the papers drawn up." There was a pause on the other end, and then the agent's voice came through, surprised. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Javier replied, his grip tightening around the phone. "I'm turning this place into something that matters, a training center for young mechanics, a place where they can learn the right way, the honest way. I'm giving them the chance I never had." As the agent confirmed the details, Javier's mind raced. He had made the decision quickly, but it felt like a weight lifting off his chest. This was his way of giving back, of taking everything he had learned from his struggles and passing it on. He wasn't going to let this place die a slow, painful death. He was going to breathe a new life into it. The old garage was no longer just a memory. It would be the foundation of something bigger, something better. And as Javier stood there looking at the empty space, he finally understood. This was the next chapter. This was where his legacy would begin. Javier sat at his desk, the soft hum of the office air conditioning filling the silence as he stared at the computer screen. He had just finished going over the monthly reports, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been weeks since the grand opening, and the training center had already begun to show promise. Young mechanics were enrolling, eager to learn the skills that would give them a chance at a real future. But even as he sat there, proud of the work they were doing, something felt off. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing when he saw the notification. A news outlet had tagged him in a post. He frowned, tapping the notification, expecting it to be about the shop or the training center. But as the article loaded, his breath caught. The Billionaire's Mechanic. How Javier Ramirez went from a struggling garage worker to running a thriving business empire. The headline hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on the work, on making things right, on changing the way things were done, that he hadn't considered what might happen once his story started getting attention. The article was everywhere, shared across social media platforms, news websites, and even local channels. Javier ran a hand over his face, his pulse quickening as he read through the piece. The story spoke about his humble beginnings, how he had worked tirelessly as a mechanic in a rundown shop before being discovered by Evelyn Sinclair, a billionaire who had believed in him when no one else would. His story was being told across the city, framed as a tale of success, a story of redemption. But to Javier, it felt like it wasn't his story anymore. It was being sold, packaged for the masses. The term Billionaire's Mechanic felt foreign, unreal. He had never seen himself like that. He was just Javier, the guy who wanted to make a living by doing something honest. He wasn't a business tycoon or a media sensation. He was just a mechanic trying to make a difference. But the article wasn't wrong, was it? He had built something. He had succeeded, against all the odds. People were looking at him now, seeing the results of his hard work. The recognition was overwhelming, and yet it made him feel like a stranger in his own life. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all of this, for the public spotlight, for the expectations it would bring. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from Evelyn. "Congrats on the feature, Javier. You've earned it, but remember, your story is just beginning. Let's keep building." He sat back in his chair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had come so far, but now it felt like everything was shifting. The world was watching, waiting for him to prove that his success wasn't a fluke, that he could stand up to the pressure that came with recognition. But for a moment, as he looked out of the window at the bustling city below, Javier felt something stir inside him. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He had built something real, something that had meaning, and maybe, just maybe, he was ready to live up to the name that now followed him. Javier sat in the conference room, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching his ears. The meeting had ended hours ago, the usual corporate chatter and planning all blending together in his mind. But something lingered in the air, something different about today. He had worked hard to get to where he was now, but it felt like there was still so much he didn't understand, still so much about the world Evelyn had pulled him into that felt foreign. As the last of the staff trickled out of the room, Evelyn remained seated at the head of the table, her gaze steady. She had always been calm, composed, but tonight there was something in her eyes that Javier couldn't quite place. There was a quiet intensity there, as if she was deciding whether or not to share something important. "You've been doing well, Javier," Evelyn said, her voice low, almost like she was speaking to herself more than to him. "But there's something I haven't told you." She paused, watching him, as if weighing her words carefully. "Something I think you need to hear." Javier shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure of where this conversation was going. "What is it?" he asked, his voice thick with curiosity and unease. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her fingers grazing the edge of the table. "When I was your age, I wasn't the woman you see now. I didn't have the luxury of knowing everything. I didn't grow up with all the opportunities that people think I had. I struggled too." She looked away for a moment, her eyes clouded with memories. "I grew up in a small town. My father was a mechanic, and my mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. I watched them work themselves to the bone, never getting ahead. There were nights when we didn't know if we'd be able to pay rent. I watched my father's shop close down because he couldn't afford to fix the things that broke in the business. It was hard, and I felt like I was drowning." Javier's chest tightened as he listened. Evelyn, the woman who had taken him from his crumbling garage and given him a chance at something bigger, had lived through the same kind of hardship. She had fought those same battles, just in a different way. "I didn't have the luxury of walking into the business world with a silver spoon in my mouth," she continued, her voice growing softer, more vulnerable. "It was years of struggle. But that's why I do what I do now. That's why I help people like you. Because I see the potential in someone who's had to fight for everything. It's not just about money or success. It's about resilience, about believing in yourself even when the odds are stacked against you. I see that in you, Javier." Javier's mind was racing, the words she had spoken hitting him like a flood. He had always looked at Evelyn as this untouchable figure, someone who had it all together, someone who had never known struggle. But hearing her speak so honestly, so raw, shattered everything he had believed about her. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She was someone who had fought her own battles, someone who had survived. "You're not just helping me because you think I'm the right person for the job," Javier said, his voice thick with emotion. "You see yourself in me. You see what I've been through." Evelyn nodded, her gaze steady, as if she had been waiting for him to understand. "Exactly. I see someone who's been knocked down but keeps getting back up. Someone who knows the real value of hard work, of perseverance. That's why I believe in you." For the first time in his life, Javier felt like he truly understood what Evelyn was offering him. Not just a job, not just a business opportunity, but a chance to change everything. He wasn't alone in this fight. And neither was she. He could see it now, the connection, the shared understanding, the belief in something more. Javier sat back in his chair, a new sense of clarity washing over him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that went beyond success or failure. This was about legacy, and for the first time he felt like he could stand tall, ready to face whatever came next. Javier stood outside the office, the door slightly ajar as he watched Evelyn through the glass. She was on the phone, her voice steady as she spoke to a client. Her every word measured, yet warm. It was hard for him to process how much had changed in such a short time. Months ago, he had been struggling just to keep his small garage afloat, buried in bills and uncertainty. Now, here he was, standing on the cusp of something so much bigger than anything he had ever imagined. And it was all because of her. She had given him the chance, had believed in him when no one else would. And now, with the first branch of the shop thriving and the training center already filling with young mechanics, Javier couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with gratitude. He had come from nothing, from a place where survival was the goal and hope was a distant thought. But Evelyn had seen something in him that he hadn't even recognized in himself, a potential, a spark, and she had pulled him into a world that had seemed completely out of reach. When the call ended, Evelyn looked up, her eyes meeting his. He pushed open the door, walking into the room. She smiled, but there was a quiet understanding in her gaze. She always seemed to know when he was lost in thought, when he was struggling to process everything that had happened. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone soft but direct. Javier nodded, but his words caught in his throat. He had so much to say, so much to thank her for, but it didn't feel like enough. I don't know how to thank you," he finally managed, "for everything, for believing in me. I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd have the chance to do something like this." He gestured to the office, the bustling city outside, the new life that had opened up in front of him. "You've changed my life, Evelyn." Evelyn's expression softened, but she shook her head, the faintest smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "No, Javier, you did that. I didn't change your life. You did. You're the one who showed up every day, worked harder than anyone else, never backed down. It was your character, your integrity, that led you here. I just gave you the space to grow." Javier felt a lump form in his throat as her words hit him, sharper than he expected. He had always been the one to fight, to push through, but hearing her say it like that, it was humbling. She wasn't just acknowledging his hard work, she was recognizing his soul, the part of him that had never given up, even when the odds were stacked against him. "You gave me a chance," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure I would have made it without that." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "I gave you the chance, but you were the one who took it, the one who made it something real. I believe in people who have something more to offer than just skills. I believe in people who are willing to fight for what's right, who understand that success isn't just about what you can gain, it's about what you can give." Javier took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had spent so much of his life just surviving, just getting by. But now he was building something that mattered. And for the first time, he understood what she meant. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about giving back, about passing on what he had learned, about changing the lives of others the way hers had changed his. As he turned to leave the office, Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Javier," she said, her tone serious, but with a warmth that made him pause. "Remember this, you're never done growing. Every day you get to choose who you want to be. Keep choosing the man who shows up for others, who stays true to what matters, and you'll never regret it." Javier nodded, the words settling deep inside him. He had a long way to go, but now he was ready to keep going, to grow, to give back, to lead. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had found his place, and he wasn't going to waste it. Javier was just finishing up his shift when the young man walked in. He wasn't much older than Javier had been when he first started, probably around 18, with worn-out boots and a grease-streaked jacket that had seen better days. His eyes were filled with a mix of hesitation and hope, his hands clutching a rag as if it were the only thing that kept him grounded. "Can I help you?" Javier asked, wiping his hands on a towel. He couldn't help but notice the way the young man looked around the shop, eyes wide with awe at the clean, organized space. It wasn't the broken-down garage of Javier's past, where everything had felt like it was barely holding together. This place was different. It was professional, modern, a place where someone could start fresh. The boy shifted on his feet, looking nervous. I I don't really know how to say this, but I've been working at a garage down the street for a few months now, and I can't seem to get ahead. The boss keeps cutting corners, and I don't feel like I'm learning anything. I want to be better, you know? I want to do things the right way, like you do here. Javier studied him for a moment, the words hitting closer to home than the boy likely realized. He remembered what it was like to feel stuck, to look at the people around you and wonder if you'd ever get out of the cycle. He had been there once, had felt that same ache, the longing for something more than just a paycheck. The boy looked down, running a hand through his messy hair. I know I'm not perfect. I don't have the fancy training or the experience like most people, but I'm willing to work hard. I need a chance. I don't know who else to turn to. Javier felt a pang in his chest, remembering all the times he had been that kid, walking into shop after shop, hoping someone would see something in him. He had been lucky once, given a shot by someone who believed in him when he had no reason to believe in himself. Now it was his turn to pass that chance on. With a soft smile, Javier reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card, the one he had always kept close, the one that represented everything he had built. He slid it across the counter to the boy, who looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Take this," Javier said, his voice steady yet filled with the weight of the moment. "If you're serious about learning, about doing things the right way, come by the training center. We'll start from the basics. I'll teach you everything I know. You've got the drive. That's the hardest part. The rest is just showing up." The young mechanic's eyes widened as he took the card, disbelief written all over his face. You'd really do that?" Javier nodded, his expression firm. "Everyone deserves a chance, especially if they're willing to put in the work. I was where you are once, and someone gave me that shot." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. "Now it's my turn." The boy's face lit up with a combination of shock and gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means." Javier nodded, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, a deep, quiet pride. He watched the young man leave, his head held higher than when he walked in, the card still clutched tightly in his hand. As the door closed behind him, Javier leaned against the counter, a soft smile tugging at his lips. The journey had come full circle. He had started with nothing, fighting for every opportunity, and now he was offering that same chance to someone else. It was more than just teaching mechanics. It was about teaching hope, about showing others that they too could build something, even when it seemed impossible. For the first time, Javier felt the weight of his success not as a burden, but as a responsibility. He wasn't just changing his own life anymore. He was changing the lives of others, and that, more than any business deal or success story, was the legacy he would leave behind.